As I sort of just mentioned, we're going to talk through the process of producing your own video using your phone. So we're going to focus on the pre-production process and the production process. So the pre-production process is essentially, the planning of it, what you're going to do, scripts, those kind of things, just basically planning out exactly what you're going to be filming. And then production. So production is essentially the filming step. So actually going out on set, on location, whether it's an interview or you might be doing a lab shoot or whatever it might be, and actually filming that particular content. I'm going to quickly talk about post-production as well. There is a dedicated session to that tomorrow that focuses on post-production, and post-production is actually editing your video, so editing in Premiere, which is what the tomorrow session will focus on. But really, any video editor nowadays in the modern world can handle the video editing very well, produce nice quality product. So even just the default free one you have on your machine right now will do okay in terms of editing a video. And then, of course, just quickly talk about exporting as well. So the sort of the right settings for that. So, but mainly today, pre-production and production. So what do you actually need? So in order to produce a good quality product for yourselves, you do need some kind of storyboard. So a storyboard is essentially, a storyboard can be a little bit confusing because people call a storyboard by different names. It might be a script, it might be a shot list, but it's essentially a storyboard is a list of all the shots you're going to actually record for your particular video. Here we call them a storyboard. Somewhere else they might call it a script or a shot list, but they tend to be roughly around about the same thing. Some kind of phone, and it doesn't have to be phone. It can be if you've got your own SLR camera, if you've got your own video cameras, of course you can use them and just use the same sort of tips and tricks I talk about today. But yeah, phones, they don't have to be top of the line. Most phones made in the last few years, even longer than that, can produce really, really nice, beautiful footage. They have stabilization, they have great color, they have autofocus. So it doesn't have to be the most fanciest phone. Most phones nowadays can do quite well. You will need for the next step in production will be some kind of video editor. As I said, could be iMovie, could be Premiere, could be Rush. So Adobe Premiere and Rush is actually quite easy to learn, fairly easy to use programs that you have included with your Adobe subscriptions already. So they're available straight away. Your Mac might have iMovie, your Windows machine might have something on it, or something like DaVinci Resolve is a free video editor out there as well that you can download if you wanted to go that extra step, something a little bit more advanced. And of course, a little bit of creativity and persistence. So sort of thinking creatively about what you want your concept to be and persevering. A lot of people get sort of scared about the video production process, thinking that it's going to be too hard, it's going to take too long. But it will pay off if you have good planning, you have a good script, you got everything set up, you got rooms booked, you got people lined up. Then hopefully the rest of it will be a fairly smooth process. And also it's ensuring that your camera is set up correctly as well, which I'll talk about setting up your phone in a moment, but having those little things set up so you're not taken by surprise by your phone filmed in the wrong aspect or at the wrong frame rate, or it's portraits that are landscape, or the quality's really bad or whatever, or the size of the video is too small. So all those little things can kind of hick you up. But if you persevere and you pre-plan all that, you should resolve all those little niggling problems that come along the way. All right. So this is overall kind of the screen production process. And this is the process that we use every day. And I just realized I completely didn't introduce myself. I mean, you've probably seen my name on the thing here, but I'm Tim. So I'm the manager of the educational media production team here at the Institute for Teaching and Learning Innovation. So we do this stuff every day. So we produced media for a wide range of courses across the University of Queensland. So we go out and film in labs, we go out and film interviews, we film lectures, we do animation, we do graphic design, we do sort of the whole production process. So we do this sort of stuff every single day. So you can kind of break it up into three areas. So pre-production is your planning and script writing. So it's things like choosing your format, what you want your video to be, like what is your video going to be? What do you want to produce? And then working out what you want said or what you want done in that particular production in terms of a storyboard, so a script, and what kind of shots you want. What do you want in the shot? Production, that's where you go into filming and recording. So this is actually filming the video or recording a voiceover. So I'll mention a little bit later on about different ways that you can produce video. So it might be a video that's just you demonstrating something to camera, or it might be you demonstrating something and you might have voiceover over the top if a person doesn't want to be on camera explaining something. So that's what the production process involves. And then post-production is bringing all your files into the editor, arranging the clips, and then exporting it and uploading it to wherever it needs to be. So most pieces of software now have really, really good built-in presets for exporting your video out. You know, kind of gone are the days where you go to export a piece of video and it pops out and the quality is really terrible, the size is really wrong, frame rate's wrong. You don't know what format it's in, what file format, etc. There's a lot of really nice presets out there that you can use. And if all else fails, just use a YouTube one. You know, nearly every program has a YouTube preset to export out as, and that normally exports videos out at really nice quality and a decent file size. That'll be explained a bit more in tomorrow's session. But yeah, so just be aware of that sort of those aspects. So three sort of key parts to the screen production process. All right. So let's have a bit of a chat about pre-production. So planning and script writing. So I've just got to make sure that I did actually share the screen with sound. All right, just make sure I'll share the screen with sound. There we go. There we go. Cool, because I've just got some video examples coming up. So first of all, what is your video going to be? Obviously, a video can be anything. There's lots and lots of different types of videos out there. You know, here at Italy, we have like a whole suite of different kind of things that we produce. You know, from lecture videos to interviews to location shoots to scripted scenarios to drama scenarios, etc. But I'm just going to sort of go through the main ones that most people are probably here for. But, you know, if it's not one of these three, the skills that I talk about today will relate to basically anything. But generally people come here because they want to do some kind of presentation to camera. Where they're talking to camera, and that might be interspersed with some other video footage or imagery, or what we call B-roll. So B-roll, when you hear the term B-roll is essentially other footage besides you presenting directly to camera or your main piece of footage. It's anything else. It's your cutaway shots. So if you're doing a demonstration of a piece of equipment, the main sort of angle will be you talking to camera, and then the B-roll might be cutting away to you sort of using a piece of equipment or demonstrating a piece of equipment. So that's sort of one way people kind of present stuff, and that's good for experiments. So if you've got an experiment you're wanting to show, or a piece of equipment, process, then that is really good for that. It could also be, you know, scenarios. So we do a lot of scenarios here where we go out and we film, say in hospitals, doing pretend clinical consults or midwifery consults and things like that. So they could be an example of, you know, presenting to camera and doing a scenario with maybe some B-roll of processes involved in whatever clinical or whatever scenario it might be. The other option is if your person maybe doesn't want to be speaking. So they might just be demonstrating something, and then you might just do a voiceover later on. And that's really good if you have something that's quite complex, and maybe the person trying to explain it as they're doing it is not going to work, and it might be too distracting for them to explain it. And so maybe just having them just do it and then doing a voiceover later on can kind of help. The key with that, and we run into this problem a lot with the videos that we produce, is making sure you have enough footage to cover your voiceover. There's nothing worse than you go to record your voiceover and then you don't have enough footage. So it's kind of important to make sure that when you have your script, you actually kind of plan it out and you time it out. So you know that, you know, if your script runs for 10 minutes, then you know you have 10 minutes of demonstration. And you don't have to try and fill in any gaps. If you have gaps, then they can be filled with PowerPoint presentations with some text popping up. That's how we do it. If there's any gaps, just some images popping up, just some other stuff. But a good way to get around that if you do have gaps is maybe just film more footage than you need. If you're filming your main stuff, and then there might be some other elements within the room, you might just be able to film some other parts of the room or other objects in the room, just in case you need to fill some gaps. The other quite popular video format is an interview. So interviews are really, really good for getting industry experts in to talk about a particular subject matter. So students really, really appreciate getting real-world perspectives on their particular course. And we did a bit of research into this last year where I was doing a presentation and I reached out to some students about what they liked, and they really, really liked the interviews. And the interviews can be sort of used instead of a lecture. So if you have a lecture on a particular subject, maybe that subject could be better represented by an interview with an expert in that field, and it comes across a little bit more genuine, a little bit more interesting for the student as well. So yeah, interviews are really, really effective. Another thing you just need to be aware of is trying to keep your videos fairly short. Students are quite time poor, and they have little pockets of time. We call them pockets of time. They have 12 minutes on a bus. They have 20 minutes on a train. They might have a few minutes between class or whatever. So having shorter videos is quite beneficial as well for those small pockets of time. Particularly, if a student sees a video that's half an hour long, they're probably going to just go, oh, I'll watch that later, or they may just not get around to it. But if it's, say, 10 minutes, they'll be like, oh, I've got a bit of time, I'll watch it. And if you do have a longer video and you might be able to split it up into smaller parts, they might watch one for 10 minutes and then be like, oh, I like that, I'll watch the next one, another 10 minutes. Whereas if they saw something that was 20 minutes or 30 minutes, they may not actually sit and watch it. I'm a bit like that on Netflix and YouTube now. I see something that's 10 minutes and I'm like, oh, I'll watch that. That's great. But then I'll find I'll probably watch 20 10-minute videos in a row because I start getting caught up. It's a similar thing with educational media as well. So aim to keep them as short as you can while still getting the information across. And I've got the meeting chat up here as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to put anything into the chat. So this is a bit of an example of presenting to camera. This is demonstrating a particular piece of equipment, and this did involve 2 cameras. So some of these examples you'll see do involve multiple cameras, but this can be achieved with one. It might just be a matter of recording the whole thing or recording it in pieces from one angle and then stopping and then getting the camera in a bit closer and recording the smaller bits. Or if you have 2 phones recording at the same time, have one locked onto the person speaking and the other phone or camera onto the equipment closer up. So this is a nice example of presenting to camera, demonstrating a piece of equipment.
ESR, or electron spin resonance, is a kind of magnetic spectroscopy that can probe the structure of molecules, especially if they have a single unpaired electron. Its diverse uses show up in fields like material physics, chemistry, geology, and even archaeology. The sample that we'll be probing in this experiment is diphenyl picryl hydrazine, or DPPH. The main thing you need to know about this substance is that...
So for that example there, you can kind of see there was we sort of got the locked off shot of him talking. And then every so often we sort of cut in with some close-up shots. So they were done with another camera. Some of them were actually recorded. I think that might have been recorded separately later on because we didn't get quite the right positioning. But sort of the other close-up shots that happened along, they were recorded at the same time with, I could just jump to one, with another camera angle. So that's a really good way of sort of covering the shot to get everything in. So you're not just having to maybe zoom in as you're recording. So yeah, that's sort of one example, presenting to camera. Another example is a voiceover. So there might be a particular procedure that needs to be demonstrated that it's just not practical for someone to talk through the process. In this particular example, he had PPP on PPP. He had PPE on as he was demonstrating. So audio would have been muffled, microphone placement would have been difficult, and particularly if you're sort of dealing with dangerous or sort of complex procedures, maybe it's best to just record the procedure and then have a voiceover put on later on.
Turn on the power on the right side of the autoclave. Check the pressure gauge is displayed as 0 megapascals. To open the lid, press down the foot pedal and slightly push down on the chamber lid and it will slowly release. Check there is water in the exhaust bottle at the bottom of the unit. It should be halfway between the low and high level markers.
So yeah, as you can tell, that sort of goes along and essentially the same format the whole way through, recorded in small little chunks of each individual step in sequence, and then the voiceover was recorded later on. Now, a bit of a tip here that there's a couple of ways you can achieve this. Sometimes it can be good to have the script. Actually, it's very good. It's very good, I should say, to have the script beforehand, before you film, because what you can do is when you have the script on set, what you can sometimes do is have someone in the background maybe speaking what's actually happening. So maybe the person can follow along as they're speaking to get an idea of timing. That can also help with making sure that you don't have any gaps in your footage as well. So that's why it is good to have things sort of planned out ahead of time. So you have that script and you have that shot list of all the shots you need. So you can go along and tick them off as you're doing it. And also maybe have a person in the background kind of prompting to make sure that you're actually hitting the correct things as you go along. The other important thing is that what we find with a lot of videos like this is there's a way people do it, and then there's a way it's done. And that can be different. So what you often find is that people do it, you record it, and then they go back and watch it, and I'm like, oh, that's not the way you're supposed to do it, because they're taking shortcuts or whatever, because that's the way people actually do it. But there's a difference between the way you do it and the way you teach it. So you should be teaching the right way. So that's why it's important to make sure that you have the script, it's pre-planned, you have it written down the correct and proper way. So then you're on set, you're demonstrating the correct way. And then if people want to do it a different way later on, that's fine, but you've got yourself covered because you've got the correct procedure. Interviews. So interviews are a really great way to get industry perspectives on things. There's a couple of different ways you can do interviews. We do what we call sort of one-person interviews or one-person interviews or two-person interviews. So a one-person interview is where you essentially have the person sit down. They are asked the questions by someone, but that someone is always off camera. And then when you go in to actually edit the video, you cut out the questions being asked and you just keep the responses. And this is good if you want, if maybe the person asking the questions isn't comfortable with being on camera. Or you might have a mashup of different people in the one clip. So you might be interviewing 3 or 4 people, and you don't want one person asking the question and then responses from multiple people, because those multiple people might be in different rooms and it tends to be a bit weird. So instead of having the person ask the question, you might have, say, a question come up on screen like it is here. So this is a question being asked just with a text card instead of being asked by an actual person. And then the person just jumps.
So I'm Janie Morris. I'm the co-founder and Chief Operating Officer of Corio. So Corio, we're a boutique circular economy consultancy with a pretty big mission to transform economies to serve people and nature. So
that's a one-sided. Another good way to sort of break up a one-sided interview is to have a second angle. So if you do have the luxury of a second camera, it can be good to actually have another angle. And the reason it's nice to have another angle is because if they make a mistake halfway through a response, what you can do is sometimes instead of getting them to start again, you can sometimes just cut around it in editing. And because you've got that other angle, you can actually cut to the other angle to fix up the mistake that was made. And yeah, it's just a really good of kind of covering up sort of mistakes, and also to add a bit of interest to your shoot. So it's not just stuck on the one shot of the person. And then, of course, two-person interview is where you actually have two people on camera speaking. Thank you, Joseph, for I make a bit of a cameo in this one. Working with us on your clinical audiology course. We had a lot of fun. It was great fun to shoot and to edit. So I'm really interested in wanting to understand from you the experience of working with the media team and the learning designer. So my first question is about the DLU process, and just wanted to get your sort of take on your experience of being part of the team, working with the learning. And so that's a two-sided interview, probably the more common type, where you want both the interviewee on camera. The good thing about this is that you can have a nice dialogue between people. You can do follow-up questions really easily. You don't have to worry about, you know, if you got multiple people on. Sorry, you don't have to sort of worry about if the question goes off track or anything, because you don't have question cards, because you want to keep question cards quite simple. But if there's a two-sided interview, the questions tend to get a bit more complicated, a bit longer. So the back and forth might be a bit different. So and I'm actually breaking a bit of a rule here that I'll talk about later on, is that, you know, when you are conducting an interview, try to avoid glancing down at notes. You can see that was quite distracting. I'm completely rubbish at remembering, you know, anything. So I had to look at my notes. I just couldn't get around it. So that just sort of needs to be avoided, is looking down at notes, because it can be quite distracting. So that's a good example of what not to do when you're asking a question. Thank you. All right, so once you've actually worked out what you're going to do, it's time to develop a storyboard. So a storyboard is, you know, when people talk about storyboards, they're kind of talking about different things. But when we talk about a storyboard here at Italy, and this can be sort of something you can take along with you as well, is we're kind of talking about a script and a shot list, kind of a combination of what a person says and essentially what you want actually filmed. So very important that this needs to be organized ahead of time. So what we also sort of, what the other benefit of a script is, it allows you to know how long a video might be. So you can get a bit of an idea of how long your video might be. You know, and also just to make sure that you know exactly what kind of shots you're going to be able to get. Oh, I've just got a quick question. With a text card to break up interviews, are there any drawbacks to adding a voiceover to cards for visually impaired students? That's a very good point. If the question cards are there, then obviously there's, you know, the actual voice that the actual question isn't being spoken to. So that's a very good point, and something to be considered, that maybe sometimes having the voice with the question card might be a good idea. But traditionally we don't do that. We just have a question card pop up. But that's certainly something to consider. So what we also like people to do is when you're developing a script or a shot list, is it's nice to sort of have small chunks of text as you're going along, because it's having really long monologues and really long dialogues that last minutes and minutes and minutes. That can be quite burdening on a person delivering that content to camera. So that's why it's sometimes good to, you know, say have a person talk for a couple of minutes, and then maybe cut to another shot, and then maybe another small piece of text, and then another shot. So you're kind of breaking up what's being said into small, manageable chunks, so the person doesn't have to deliver a long dialogue to camera. And this can be facilitated by, you know, you might have a person introducing what they're talking about, and then it might cut to a shot of something like a small piece of equipment they're demonstrating. So it means that they can kind of have a bit of a break, and then when they're demonstrating a piece of equipment, they can stop, you can press record again, and then they can start talking about the smaller item they're speaking about. So sort of chunking it up into smaller pieces. And we do that all the time in our studio here when we're filming people, because it's really difficult to get through minutes and minutes and minutes of dialogue without making a mistake. And if you make a mistake, you've got to go all the way to the beginning. So having small, manageable pieces certainly helps. And also what helps is having the multiple camera angles. So if you have multiple camera angles from multiple phones or multiple other cameras, you know, if a person makes a mistake, then you can cut around that using that other angle. And as I said, a change in shot type is a great way to sort of achieve being able to chunk this stuff up by having blocks of text and then cutting to something else in the shot so they can stop, refresh, and then start speaking about the next item. So as I said, if delivering to camera, try and keep the dialogue short, so chunk it up. It's also good that when you're developing your script, is to have a think about what kind of shots you want to actually show. So a real kind of handy guide is this sort of shot size guide. I think I was using this in uni myself. So this image has been around for a long time. But essentially, this gives you a bit of an idea of the different kind of shot types that you can write in your storyboard or your script. So you might have your first shot might be a medium long shot, for example, that will show, if you're demonstrating, if you're in a lab environment, that shot might establish what's happening in the scene. It'll show all the equipment. And then you might cut to a closer shot, say medium close up, where the person's actually speaking for a little bit. And then you might cut back to a medium long shot, where you go back to the equipment being demonstrated. So that's a really good way of sort of varying your shots. And we also do this a bit when we're doing interviews as well. So if we've only got one camera for an interview and we don't have the option of switching to another camera, what we do is we actually sometimes cut in or zoom in on the footage when we're editing. So it looks like we've got two different cameras, but actually we're just varying the type of shot that we've captured. That's a really good way of sort of cutting up a shot as well. So you might have one camera in one position, but then in post, you might cut in closer in that footage. So it looks like you've stopped recording and you've gone to another camera. So you can kind of fudge the idea of having multiple cameras. So these little abbreviations here are quite good for you keeping track of the kind of shots that you want. It's unlikely that you'll use sort of the big close-up and the extreme close-up on a person's face. That's probably more for equipment if you're getting really, really close to a piece of equipment that you're wanting to demonstrating. Storyboard is really also good for having placeholder imagery in lieu of what you're actually filming. So if I bring up the storyboard example here, so essentially you have 3 columns, and this is similar to the kind of storyboard that we actually use. You have your shot type and number in the first column. So this is where you would put that abbreviation. So in this particular example, it's, it might start off with a close-up shot, or you're probably more likely to start off with a bit of a wider shot than a close-up. But generally you'd have a shot type in there, and then you would have sort of what's said. So what is actually going to be said with that particular kind of shot. And then the last column, basically just listing what's going to appear in that particular shot. So here the person has said, in this experiment, we're going to start by setting up our equipment. And then, while that's actually happening, it's a close-up of hands moving glassware from a cabinet, for example. So this particular one here was probably an example of a video that might have been with a piece of voiceover. So maybe it was just shots of a close-up of a person's hand as they were getting equipment out of a cabinet, and the voiceover was, in this experiment, we're going to start off with setting up our equipment, and the close-up is of the hands moving. And then you would sort of just go through your storyboard and set it up in much the same way. Have your script sort of chunked up into little sections, and then your shot type, what kind of shot type you actually want in terms of close-up or medium shot or whatever it might be. And then in the assets, describe what you want that shot to actually be. And you can also put imagery and screenshots and photographs in there, so you can kind of pre-plan the video ahead of time. So you can use that column to dump all that other information in. A bit of an example here is of a script that we did for a midwifery consult. So this doesn't actually have the shot types in here. Now, I think the reason for this is they weren't kind of too sure what the shots were going to be ahead of time, because this is something that we were producing. Sometimes you're unsure about what it's going to be like because you're unsure of the space. So we went in and we actually decided, just by the setup of the room, what the shots might have been. But certainly, if they were planning this shot, they might have said, this could have been, like a mid shot or something like that. of a person coming in and sitting down and talking to someone, then it might be a close-up of the people talking or whatever. So yeah, just nicely small chunked up shots, small dialogue chunks, and then the last column, just talking through exactly what's happening. And, this particular, so zooming in on the hands of the student taking the blood pressure. You could even have imagery that might pop up on the screen as well in this last column. So just being around to utilize this to plan every single aspect of your particular shoot. And having shot numbers is kind of important too, because you can actually just literally go, all right, we've done shot 1, we've done shot 2, we've done shot 3. And it's a really nice way to sort of tick off shots as you go along, to sort of keep track of things. And just having this printed out and just crossing it off as you do the shot is a really, really nice and easy way to make sure you don't miss anything. So we do actually have a dedicated writing course. So this writing course does talk about writing for educational media. So I know I kind of glossed over a bit there about the script and the pre-production, but there is a really nice Workday course that goes about that into more detail. It talks about how to generate a script, goes through all that process. So you can do that on Workday. Just to go into Workday, go to the professional learning courses and just type in writing educational media. And you'll be able to do a really nice in-depth, I think it's like a 45-minute online course about how to actually generate a script and a storyboard for educational media. So a really beneficial course to take in partnership with this. Yes, so you'll receive a copy of these slides. You'll receive a copy of the recording. I think the recordings might go out next week. But what I tend to do is I tend to also just send the slides as well, just because they've got links to those videos in there, so you can watch that in full. And also I send you a link to our blank storyboard as well, so you'll have that all. And I'll try to send that out today if I can, or sometime this week, the actual PowerPoint presentation of the storyboard template. All right, so the actual filming and recording process. So the first thing you need to do is set up your camera. So this is going to be more geared towards phones, because if you have an SLR camera or other video camera, it's likely that you might know those settings anyway. But generally, the same kind of idea applies. Generally, sort of when you're setting up your phone, and I'll talk about Android and iPhone, is you want to sort of. First of all, there's a few considerations. Can your phone film in 4K? And also, do you have the space on your phone for recording in 4K? Is your computer going to be able to handle it, etc.? That's one consideration, because it is always beneficial to film in 4K versus sort of your standard, so your high definition. So most of the time, most people are probably filming in 1080p high definition video, and that's fine for most things. And it's good quality. The file size is going to be fairly small. Most video editors are going to be able to handle that kind of file. And when I say 1080p, it just means that it's 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels high. That's considered the full HD pixel size of video. And the standard kind of is, probably around about 30 frames per second. And that's what most people will record in. However, if you have the ability to record in 4K on your phone, that does give you the real benefit of not only having a higher quality video output, but also gives you the ability to zoom in on your footage when you're editing. And I'll show an example slide of that later on. But 4K just is a lot more versatile. And I'll explain that in a second. But the other consideration is how many frames per second your video is going to be. Most people on their phones will record in 30 frames per second. But if for some reason you're wanting to slow your footage down, maybe you're wanting to sort of slow down a particular process that you're actually recording, or often B-roll or cutaway footage in interviews and other types of videos is often slowed down. You'll often, when you watch a video like a promo video or whatever, the cutaway footage is slowed down. It tends to be the way things are. Then filming in 60 frames per second is good, because that allows you to sort of slow that stuff down. And setting your files to high efficiency, there's normally like a tick box there for high efficiency, just means it'll reduce the file size of your videos, and you'll still have quite a high quality output as well. Android, this will look different depending on what sort of phone you have. The iPhones tend to be quite consistent with their settings, but the Android might be a little bit different. But generally it's the same. Looking for 1080p, it might be labeled as FHD, 30 or 60. So again, 30 is fine if you're not going to be slowing stuff down. If your phone has the ability, it might have UHD for 4K. So that's what it might call that. And again, 30 or 60, depending if you want to slow it down. Stabilization is always really good to have turned on with your videos as well to reduce shaking and reduce file size. Again, that sort of puts it in sort of that high efficiency mode on Android. So 4K, just a quick talk about 4K. So this will show you the video size difference between full HD video and ultra HD 4K video. It's much larger in terms of its size. But the main benefit, and what we do all the time, is we film in 4K, but we always export our videos out at 1080p. The reason being is that most video doesn't need to be any higher than that for educational video. It's not being produced for TV. It's not being produced for Netflix. It's just mainly going on YouTube or in Blackboard. So it doesn't need to be outputted at 4K because the file size are going to be quite big. Some computers may struggle. So we kind of tend to just record at 4K, export at full HD, because, and this is the reason why, if you have just 1080 HD footage and you're editing that at HD and you zoom into that footage in the video editor, you're going to have this blurry, horrible look here because you're just making pixels bigger, blurring the edges of the pixels. It looks terrible. But if you have 4K footage, which is literally 4 times the size of your HD footage, what you can do is you can have a normal HD project, put a 4K video in, and essentially you can zoom into that footage so it'll appear like you've almost got 2 different angles of the same shot, which really is really beneficial for not only interviews, but also lab shoots if you're wanting to zoom into something on set. So that's a really, really good benefit of filming at 4K if your device is capable. All right, so presenting. So what actually happens on the day? So I know if you're presenting to camera and you're going to be talking through some kind of script or whatever, then try and find a quiet place. I know that's not possible if you're in a lab environment that's quite loud, but the reason I say the quietest place is that, if you're presenting to camera and you're near a cafe and that cafe isn't in the shot or you're not talking about a cafe, then that's going to be quite distracting. But if you're standing in front of a cafe talking about cafes and there's noisy cafe, it's fine because it sort of makes sense. If you're in a lab and it's a bit noisy, it makes sense. But if you're in like a nice quiet space, like a classroom or whatever, and there's just like weird noises outside, weird talking, it's like, oh, what's that? That's quite distracting because the noises don't match what's happening. So try and find a quiet place if you can. But of course, noisy, if it's in context with what you're saying, is perfectly fine. Get as close to your subject as possible. The reason, especially if you don't have the ability to zoom in 4K. So don't be too far away. Don't be too close. Just get far enough away so you can get all the vital elements within shot. That also helps with microphone pickup as well. So if you don't have like a Bluetooth external microphone, like this example here, just connect to your phone via Bluetooth, or in this case, USB-C, then getting closer to the subjects is quite beneficial. But those Bluetooth mics are quite cheap now, and they're quite good. And they just pip in on you, and like the lapel ones in lecture studios, they pick up really, really good audio. So they're a quite good thing to have. Always hold your phone landscape. Never do a portrait. Unless you're doing it for social media, of course, then that's fine. But always landscape. You don't want to have to try and turn it and zoom in. That's a whole faff. And it is nicer if you do start off with maybe a wider shot and then cut closer when you're filming. You don't have to do this all the time, but it is kind of nice if you know, if you're demonstrating a piece of equipment, you might start off with a wider shot of you sort of talking through the equipment, and then you go into sort of closer shots as you go along, rather than sort of just sort of starting off with the closer shot. You know, it's nice to sort of establish the scene, get all the elements within the scene so people sort of know what the environment is before you sort of start zooming in. And also with some cutaway shots, I got this note here down here, when shooting cutaway shots, don't speak or make any sound, so you can use the ambient sound around you. Yeah, if you're kind of cutting around and you're getting sort of shots of other elements, particularly equipment or other things, or you might be filming a restaurant, or you might be filming people in the Great Court or whatever, you know, try to avoid sort of talking in the background, so you can kind of just get that nice ambient sound. If you're guaranteed not to need that ambient sound, don't worry about it. You can talk as much as you want. But sometimes it's nice to you know, to get the ambient noise of people in a crowd or a cafe or the piece of equipment you're demonstrating without having sort of chatter or other distracting noises in the background. So when you're shooting your footage, it's really, really good to sort of, before you start recording, is to have, you know, just sort of talk and say something like, you know, this is the midwifery consult, shot number 1, and action, just so you can kind of, identify what the clip is. So if you're watching the clip back a little later on, you know that it's the midwifery consult, you know it's shot 1. And the action is just really good because it means, all right, we're action and we're ready to go. So that's good to sort of say before you start a clip. And then it's also good to maybe have about 2 to 3 seconds before someone actually starts speaking. So you don't want to say action and then the person starts speaking straight away. You want a little bit of time to cut around when you're editing it. Otherwise, it can be a bit abrupt. Teleprompters are also quite good if you have a person speaking directly to camera, and they may not be able to remember what's being said. Now, this, of course, isn't good for interviews. We never like to use a teleprompter for interviews. But if it's a location and someone's speaking to camera and they may not be able to remember, you can use a teleprompter. It's important to put this above the camera. And of course, you don't need a fancy piece of equipment like this. It can just be an iPad with a script and a text document, and you're scrolling that script. But it needs to be above the lens of the camera. Anywhere else, and the eye line won't look correct. So that's kind of important. And also you need to be, you know, much more animated, a little bit like I am now. Like, I don't sit and talk to people like this and move my hands and have this kind of melodic tone and this smile and this enthusiasm when I'm talking to people. I shouldn't say that, probably make people think I'm enthusiastic about talking to them. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is when you're presenting, you have a different way of speaking, and what you want to do is try to bring that to when you're presenting. So using your mannerisms more, being melodic with your tone, you know, pausing to emphasize important things. So if something's really important, you might slow down and you might emphasize it, or you might just, if something's not important, you just sort of brush through it and go through until you get to the next really, really important point. So being a bit melodic with your speech is important. And ticking off your shots as you go so you can keep track on your storyboard is important as well. Avoiding shaking footage, getting some kind of tripod, whether that's just a cheapo tripod for Kmart for your phone, or a gimbal. You know, you can get your smartphone on a gimbal now. They're quite cheap. You know, I got a cheaper one from Audi for like $50, and your phone kind of just locks into it. Or, you know, if you are handheld, you're kind of trying to keep it close to your body. You know, use your body is kind of a bit of a stabilization, and then the stabilization within the phone itself will kind of help. Also, it's important to try and get more footage than you actually need on set as well. So we kind of say, get all your vital shots first. So get all the shots you definitely need 100% to make the video work first. And then if you've got a bit of time afterwards, just get some other shots of cutaway shots of around, you know, in the lab, in the Great Court, in the lecture theatre. You know, it might be just shots of just things around the room, to kind of cut in it if you need be, if you need to sort of cut around any mistakes or just bulk out some stuff that you might have some missing footage for a voiceover. And also try to avoid taking really, really long takes. Excuse me. That's what we kind of say, sort of film in smaller chunks if you can. Trying to find ways to break your sort of script apart. So you're not trying to maintain speaking for a long period of time because A, your voice starts to go, a little bit like mine is. It's only been 45 minutes. But also people just get a bit weary. So it's good to try and break up scripts as much as you can. And that's talked about in that script writing course as well. And also if you're going to be moving your camera around, using sort of nice smooth pans, don't sort of try and have your phone always locked off all the time. If you're filming some stuff, use some nice fast pans if you're wanting to sort of emphasize a busy street or something interesting and fast happening. But maybe slower pans when it's sort of a little bit more of a slower, more relaxed kind of environment that you're trying to film, and just adding those kind of, nice subtle camera movements in can really up your production quality. Be mindful of people when filming in public. Some people may not like to be on camera. Generally, sort of if you're out and about in public, filming is okay. You may have people come up to you and say they don't want to be on camera, but generally if someone's sort of going to be featured and actually going to be noticeable and talking on camera, then you will have to get their permission. So we do have release forms out there, and there's a link in this document for that. If you are going to be specifically going out and talking to a person, they're going to be quite featured, then it's important to make sure you get their permission to sign off. And also, of course, if you're filming on private land or inside public buildings, some people say public buildings can film as much as you want. But if you're going inside a public building, some people may be a bit funny about it. Maybe just be making security aware that you're in there filming, and they'll probably be fine with it. It all depends on who the security person is, and maybe there might be some rules around filming. But just make sure you're aware of what you can and can't do with filming on campus. If you are filming like a lecture or with a group of students, it is also always best to just make sure you sort of tell them that they're going to be on camera. And some might like to just sit somewhere else, maybe off camera, just so they're aware. And this is the information about the consent form and the link here. So this will be in the PowerPoint I send, so you can read this information in your own time and download those forms for people to sign. Composition is also something to consider. So when you're presenting to camera, you want to sort of try and make sure the person is relatively centered or off to one side, depending on what they're demonstrating. So if they're presenting straight to camera and talking straight to camera, generally you sort of have them centered, particularly in these top examples where you have sort of equipment laid out. But of course, if that doesn't work, you can have them off center. That's perfectly fine. And one thing to sort of be aware of is sort of have some kind of headroom. Don't sort of have their head too close to the top of the frame. You don't want them chopped off. You can generally have a little bit less headroom the closer you get to a subject. So the wider away, you'd have a little bit more headroom, whereas the closer you are, you can have a little bit less. But you don't want too much headroom. Like you don't want the person's face like too far down in the middle of the shot. So you have this massive amount of headroom. It never looks good. You want to sort of trying to keep the eye line in the sort of the top third of the shot. It's called the rule of thirds, where you kind of, and I have a bit of an example later on, you kind of chop up the screen into kind of these thirds, these quadrants, and then try and place a person within that. I'll show an example later on, but it's just a bit of an idea of how to sort of compose a shot nicely. Always, if someone's talking to camera, try to get them to maintain eye contact as much as possible. Try to avoid glancing around the room too much. And yeah, avoid, unless they're looking at a prop or demonstrating something, eye contact can be lost. Oh, here's that rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds, you tend to sort of try and have the person's eye line, particularly with an interview, you try to sort of have that person sort of in those intersecting lines, looking in opposite directions. So it looks like when you actually cut the video together, they actually are facing each other, having a nice amount of headroom above, and just try to keep the focal point on one of those intersecting lines, particularly those top intersecting lines there. That's why we tend to keep sort of the mouth or the eyes or the face in that area. And here, you'll notice that we try to keep, the person in the bottom right, he's sort of in that top intersecting. Whereas the lady, because she's in the middle, we've just sort of kept her sort of in that top line that of the thirds there. So with interviews, always avoid looking at the camera. That can be very, very distracting. So make sure you keep your eyes fixed on the person that's asking the questions, even if that person's going to be cut out of the final product. So that's important, and always keep a little bit of headroom when you're doing your interview compositions as well. All right. If you're going to be recording a voiceover for your particular presentation, because people don't want to be on camera, this really needs to be done in a very dead silent room with limited reverberation. So something that's quite dead in terms of the sound. And a good way to do that is you go into a room and you do a big clap and you see how much echoing there is. So rooms with curtains are really, really good. Room with sort of heavy furniture. Or under your Doona, if you get your laptop and you record the voiceover under a Doona, that can work really, really well. Or just a high quality, USB mic that you might get from JB Hi-Fi or wherever for under $100 or whatever. So even some microphones on laptops and computers nowadays are not too bad. So again, when you're recording a voiceover, you want to be in that sort of confident melodic tone with good projection. Much like as if you were presenting to camera. And most software, most computers have some kind of audio recording software. Your video editor will have some kind of voiceover software in it as well. Sourcing images, music, and video. So we all have access to Adobe Stock, so that's fine. But you also have access to the some other royalty-free or Creative Commons websites as well. So these are all okay to use. So certainly you can use sources from outside of Adobe Stock. Just make sure you have a look at the actual referencing or the terms and conditions. Like some may say, you don't need to reference something or you do need to reference something. What we tend to do is we don't tend to reference music in our videos, but we do tend to reference any videos or images we use, just so people can go back and find those images later on if they wanted to. If you're using all kind of stock videos and nothing that's vitally research important, then maybe you can just put like a blanket notice at the end saying all the images here were from Adobe Stock. But if it's an image that might be important for someone to go back and find, like nobody's going to care about going back and finding this stock image of this lady looking at a computer, right? But if that was a lady sitting at an antique computer that was in a particular museum and that photo was from that museum, they may want to go back and look at that photo and find out where that came from. So it's probably good to reference stuff that's particularly reference individual clips that aren't from like those free stock sites, so people can go back and look at them. AI generated imagery. So this is something to consider as well. This is a changing space. So there's lots of advice that kind of comes and goes, and this does change. But generally the current advice with using AI generated images is they want to tend to avoid, and when I say they, I mean UQ. UQ wants to avoid the use of AI generated people as much as possible. But there are instances where if you cannot find an image for your video, and the only image is involves an AI generated person, then that's okay, but it needs to be accurate. So the person can't have 5 fingers, 4 eyes, and 9 legs. It needs to be as accurate as possible. It needs to be very, very realistic in order for you to use it. It's part of the authenticity of UQ. So that's quite important. Don't use AI to alter the hero images of someone. So how do you reference in a video? Yeah, so if you're referencing in a video, what people do is, and actually I've got an actual slide here, hang on. So it's some kind of slide like this, is like at the end, you can say, all right, so I've used some stuff that's AI generated, I've used some stuff from Adobe Stock, except for, and then you list all the other things that weren't in Adobe Stock or weren't from other sites. And you'll see they've got numbers. And then in the video, you'll have numbers against the imagery. So I don't have any, I've got one previous, but say this cat, I'd have like a 1 at the bottom near the cat. So I can identify that in the last slide. Yeah, so that's how you would sort of reference. The unfortunate thing about referencing AI stuff is that the reference for the AI image needs to be on the actual slide. So it needs to be like it is here, which looks a bit yuck. So that's another downside of using AI imagery. So It's okay for scientific and abstract purposes as long as it's accurate. So if you want a picture of a piece of DNA and it's an AI generated piece, then you know, that's fine as long as it's accurate. All right. So the very last step, and this is talked a lot more in tomorrow's session, is about exporting the video. Is about editing the video. So these are done by, you know, things such as Clipchamp, Rush, Premiere, DaVinci Resolve, iMovie. All video editors work roughly the same. Essentially, it's just bringing the footage in, laying it on a timeline, making sure if it's UQ, making sure it's UQ branded and appropriate, and I'll talk about that in tomorrow's session. But essentially just selecting clips, arranging, trimming, and according to your particular storyboard, and making sure that you're using the EQ approved templates, and then exporting the videos out and making sure they're using the correct export settings for small file size, appropriate for uploading to Blackboard and other sites. But I'll talk about that in far more detail in tomorrow's session. So if there's any sort of questions, feel free to, I know we've got 2 minutes, but we can probably go a little bit longer, I think, if no one has to run off. If you have any questions in the chat for me, or jump on and you can unmute your microphone and ask me a question. In the meantime, feel free to please head over and complete the survey. There's lots of other events also happening around Ready to Teach Week, so be sure to sort of check all them out. But yeah, if anyone has any further questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Or if, you know, when I send today's slides, feel free to just flick me an email back and I can answer any questions. So yeah, so jump on if anyone has any questions. They wanted to unmute their mic or put the questions in the chat. If not, then thank you very much for coming, and I hope you got something out of that. But I'll stay on for a little bit longer if anyone has any questions or comments.
Hi, Tim. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is there a way to use different voice for the voice recording part? So I want to use my voice and then use some kind of either AI generated voice or more like a British accent or US accent.
Yeah, so in the past, we have had people use AI generated voices. There's a service called Synthesia that they actually create AI avatars that can actually speak as well, and I think that service also allows you to do AI generated voices, and that's generally been okay. It's a changing space. So we have done that in the past if it's a person speaking, but we haven't done that just for just the voiceover only. So I might make a note of that and get back to you actually, because that space is always changing, and UQ's kind of policies around that can be a bit funny. So it might be, if you use an AI voice, it might be misrepresenting you or misrepresenting your UQ by having an AI voice. So I might just check on that actually for you, because that can be a bit dicey in terms of the changing of the rules and how you would even reference that as well.
Okay.
So I'll make a note. So Darcy, I'll make a note, and I'll get back to you on that actually, and just see if UQ has any sort of change in that, or whether, you know, it's just fine to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.